Two Bars is back, baby. We're back. We're better than ever. We're ready for the season. Football is back only a couple of weeks around the corner. So what better time to kick back off Two Bars and bring in one of our good friends? It's Mr. Athletic, Mr. Jake Ciely, all in kid. Jake, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Although you might say Mr. The Athletic, because I don't know how
Oh,
athletic
sorry.
I really, yeah.
Sorry.
I was
Forgot the
always like
D.
somewhat good, like just above average. I'm basically like I'm the 53rd man on the depth chart over here.
Oh, you're number one on the depth chart in our hearts, Jake. Number one in
I
our hearts for
appreciate it.
sure. Excited to talk some ball with you. We're going to talk some projections, your projection process today, and we'll go through that. Scott, get to you, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just excited. Two Bars is back.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
big,
it
big
was,
day.
yeah, more than overdue. Bring it back here for the season. Yeah, man,
Can I
it's
say
go time.
two
Okay.
terrific beards too? Like I feel subpar in that fashion as well compared to you two.
Two
Just wait.
bars, two beards,
Two bars, two beards, three boys. Let's go. Yeah, wait
four
till like
beers.
week 15, and my beard's like down to my neck. And Scott and I are like ready, ready for the off season. But nah, man. It's good to talk to you. Good to talk ball. We'll go through some projections today. And Jake, you spend a lot of time, obviously, building projections at the Athletic. It's a big part of what you do. It's obviously a huge part of what we do in fantasy. We'll just get started off the top. Like, is there any difference for you between rankings and projections? And if there are, like, what is that distinction for you?
Yeah, it's quite a difference. That's why. So I have my projections, the customizable sheet, as you mentioned, where people can kind of go say, "Hey, Jake, you're dumb. I think this is what's going to happen," and that's what the whole point is you can customize it not just through your scoring, but if you disagree with me, and that's why my rankings are actually different than my projections as well. I'm assuming most people are similarly. Is the projections are just going to be points, more than points, more than points, more than points, more than points. It doesn't factor in upside versus risk. It doesn't factor in roster construction. It doesn't factor in a lot of things, which is why I will draft differently than my projections. Where somebody might pop off at wide receiver 40, be like, oh, you know what? The upside for him being wide receiver potentially 20 is much greater than, yeah, okay, does he probably finish around wide receiver 40 90 times out of 100? Sure, but the upside of it, like a Gabe Davis this year is a perfect example. Everybody loved Gabe Davis last year, and obviously we've cooled off of him a little bit. But, projections might spit him out wide receiver 38. But if he gets back to even 2 years ago as a full-time basis, there's top 20 upside. So I'm going to rank him higher than the projections.
Right. I think that's like absolutely crucial is do not draft off of projections, draft off of rankings. I got into quite a bit of trouble a few years ago being critical of the Fantasy Pros rankings process or contest. A lot of people draft off of that, and I just think that's like the absolute worst way to do it because those rankings are designed to win the contest.
Yeah.
Where you want to be accurate, but that's not how you should draft in fantasy. Remember, I'm the upside wins championships guy, so like rounds 5 beyond, you really want to be focusing only on upside with your projections. And so in that, it's like, James White is the consensus RB22 and he's being drafted as the RB29, but I'm like, yeah, but he's a horrible pick for fantasy because like a low end RB2 is worthless. It doesn't even matter if he beats his ADP, doesn't have that upside. And no disrespect to the Fantasy Pros contest, but yeah, like the last 2 times we entered that, or maybe even 3 times, Joe Dolan, I think, won it. But like, you're not drafting off of our projections. You're taking an L. That's minus EV if you're doing that. I think Gabe Davis was a great example. Another one is like Isaiah Likely. It's like, what do you project for Isaiah Likely? It's like 2.5 catches per game and a tight end 30 finish, something like that. It's like, okay, but what if Mark Andrews suffers an injury in week 2, then he's a league winner. Then he's an amazing pick in FFPC tight end premium leagues, an amazing pick in underdog tournament formats, probably a bad pick everywhere else. But it's like that upside, whatever your projections say are probably right, but you need to factor in that sort of upside with players like him and Gabe Davis when you're drafting your own leagues.
For sure. And I think another layer to this, and Scott, I talk about this all the time, is tiered rankings. Like, so knowing, where certain players go in certain pockets and how you are drafting those players. And Jake, you kind of touched on an important angle with roster construction. Like I'm a very dynamic drafter. Like I have my projections, I have my rankings, but if I start my draft with 3 receivers, I'm probably going to be bumping up a lot of running backs in the 5th and 6th round range. I'm going to be taking those guys. I'm going to be getting my targets slightly ahead of ADP. So it's also a factor of just knowing, who's on your team and knowing how you want to build, and also your league rules. Like I can't stress this enough, in drafts that you guys are going to be doing in the next 2 to 3 weeks as we lead into the season. Like if you're in a league where you only start 2 wide receivers, like you should be bumping up the running backs. And conversely, if you're in a league where you start 3 or more receivers, you need to be bumping up the receivers way more. So this is a part of the dynamic drafting, is like knowing your league rules. I still think is the number one edge, and being able to exploit those in your draft is the number one edge. Jake, let's kind of flip the tone here.
I have a question really quick.
Yeah,
Jake, who are some players that you're really struggling with when you're doing your projections, where you're like, well, I could see him being this high, or I could see him being this low, maybe like a wide range of outcomes. One player who comes to mind for me is Aaron Jones. 2019, 16 rushing touchdowns, then 9, then 4, then last year 2. Gets a lot of targets, probably 50-50 with A.J. Dillon in terms of carries. But last year, A.J. Dillon had like 5 times as many carries inside the 5-yard line. What should Green Bay do? Aaron Jones is one of the most efficient touchdown scorers of all time, great inside the red zone. Like he should, in my opinion, get that role, but it's just, I don't think they want that for him. And I don't know how to tackle that from a projection standpoint. I feel like if you just go right down the middle, then, like you're going to be wrong, because, like if he doesn't get that role, he's a wasted pick. If he does, he's a great value. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I would say the player, and I'm you inside my head over here. My article that's coming out this week is where my projections in ADP are the biggest gap differences, and that's the article I have. One of them at wide receiver is Deebo Samuel. That's the one guy I really don't know what to do with because of what you just said. Like my projections have him as wide receiver 28. Is there upside for top 15? Yes. Is there a floor where he's not even 28? Because what we're sitting here looking at is we got a very small sample of Brock Purdy. But if we take that sample, what did Brock Purdy tell us? Is George Kittle in the red zones is number 1. Brandon Ayuk's is number 1 wide receiver. And Deebo Samuel's not used as the backfield as much because of Christian McCaffrey. But is it, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. Is it because Deebo wasn't 100% healthy and those touches out of the backfield are really evaporated and it's only going to be 1 or 2? Or is that going to come back around and maybe Eli Mitchell's not even a factor unless Christian McCaffrey gets hurt? Does Brock Purdy adjust and now Deebo sees more targets? There is such a wide range where I could see Deebo finishing 12th and I could see Deebo finishing 48th. And as you said, kind of like if you play the middle ground, Deebo at 28 is wrong. He's either too high or too low.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Deebo has been a linchpin guy for a lot of people that have struggled to figure out in the 3rd round. I've been higher on him in the 5 games that Brock Purdy, McCaffrey, and Deebo all played together. Deebo led the team in targets per route run by far, 0.26 over Ayuk, and Kittle at 0.19. And then, like you mentioned, Deebo is, he was hurt all last year, had 3 different injuries: knee, hamstring, and I think he hurt his ankle too. Ayuk's awesome, like for sure. Yeah. But Deebo to me is still the wide receiver 1. But he's tricky, man. And I wanted to bring up kind of that whole pocket, really, like that 3rd to 4th, 5th round range is really tricky, and especially for running backs. And I know Deebo's not a running back anymore. He's not doing the wide back thing anymore. He's probably going to strictly be a wide receiver. But who are some of the running backs in that kind of like 3rd, 4th, 5th round pocket that either project well and therefore they're higher in your rankings, or are there any guys that you have like big stands on kind of in that pocket for running backs?
Yeah, so I'm going to save one for a question later when we have a committee backfield situation that we're trying to parse through, because there's one that I really love in there. But if we hit to the top end of it, it's Dameon Pierce is one that I've been a lot higher. I was a lot higher on him last year. I said talent's going to win out in this backfield, similar to Tyler Algier, who's now taking a backseat to some terrific running back. But Dameon Pierce, we knew the question was going to be, is he going to get the 3rd down work? Is Devin Singletary brought in to be a timeshare piece? What's going to happen? The first game in the preseason, Devin Singletary profiled. And again, we're trying to parse through what preseason really is, but it at least looks like he's the backup plan. And it's more Agumbawali might be the pass catcher. And then we see week 2, and then it's Dameon Pierce is staying on the field for 3rd downs, staying for that 3rd and long. And if he's a bell cow, that's what I've been projecting and profiling him as, Dameon Pierce, even on the Houston Texans, I mean, we were talking about top 15 potential running back, and at worst case, he's probably RB 16, maybe worst case scenario. Obviously, injury aside, but I'm super high on him in that range. I hate to go back to the Cam Akers well after what happened last year, promoting him in the 5th round, and everybody hates me. I don't think I have the right to talk about Cam Akers anymore. But there's one that kind of answers both questions. It goes back to Scott's question about who's somebody like with a range of outcomes that's frustrating me, and then somebody I'm high on. It's J.K. Dobbins. Like, on the one end, I'm like, hey, I don't care if he only gets 200 carries. Mark Ingram got 200 carries and he was RB 10 that year. You're stepping in next to Lamar Jackson. But the other side of it, and for like, that's not even including the last 5 games last year where he was amazing. He was an RB1. It's what's going on. Like, is this a real knee issue, or is this a quote unquote knee issue and he was just frustrated about a contract? Because if it's a real one, and there's been a few people floating out, and it's just unquantifiable rumors right now, is like the knee keeps swelling up. They're just holding him out because they don't like how. If that's the case, that could be a messy pick, and we go right back down to J.K. Dobbins' hole of frustration the entire year. A little bit lower than that. And this is one I'm coming around slowly on. I was a proponent of pushing back against James Cook because I've been a proponent of saying, you got Josh Allen who runs it in too much. We're going back to the Cam Newton years. Like, if we got one running back next to Cam Newton, yay! But it was 2. And I was like, Damian Harris has been great at the goal line. But then Damian Harris got hurt. And Damian Harris has been still banged up as of today. And now I'm coming around saying, well, if James Cook is the only real threat in that backfield, Josh Allen taking his 6, 7, 8 rushing touchdowns, I'm okay with, because if James Cook is going to get 65% of the touches, I'm okay with that then. But my concern previously was that Damian Harris was going to take too much away from him.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about just 2 of the players you mentioned. One, J.K. Dobbins, I'm with you. He's really tough for me to rank. I think one thing people are missing is that he's kind of missed all of practice and training camp. And that's really bad when there's a brand new offense. That I think really hurt Darren Waller last year, just not knowing the nuances of this new Josh McDaniels offense. And I think he very well could be in the doghouse. And then on top of that, he's missed more career games than career games he's played, but you're right. Like, the upside is undeniable. He's one of the most efficient runners ever when he's healthy. He looked great at the tail end of last year. There's talks that, Todd Monken wants the running backs more involved in the passing game. He's only ever been a 50-50 committee back, but maybe that changes. And then Dameon Pierce is probably the player I've bumped up more than anyone this preseason. I was just projecting a lot more of a committee. I don't think Devin Singletary's very good, but I think he's more of a threat than anyone else he had last year. And, Bobby Slowick coming from this Shanahan run scheme, which is very in favor of committees. And then Matthew Berry put out a tweet where something like, Dameon Pierce's ADP makes no sense to me. He's going to be an every down bell cow back behind a really good offensive line. And so I slithered into DMs. I'm like, hey, do you have sources on this? He's like, nope, just that's what I think is going to happen. And so I did a little bit more research, and I found a quote from about a week ago. They asked if Pierce is going to be more involved in the passing game. And he's like, yes, absolutely. Yes. That's why I'm losing weight, man. Bobby Slowick has me running all these routes. And that's encouraging. Like, I try to underreact to preseason more than definitely not overreact. That's bit me more times than not. And sure, he's, gotten like a bell cow role, a lot of routes run on obvious passing situations, which he didn't get last year. But sometimes these coaches just want to like see a guy in every snap, then pull him, then put a new running back in, see him on every snap, then pull him. But this is a player like I did go out of my way to bump up over a Cam Akers, who I think there's more uncertainty regarding his pass catching usage.
Yeah, I've bumped up Dameon Pierce too. I had similar concerns with you, Scott. This is a Dameon Pierce. We're a Dameon Pierce site for sure. Brett Whitefield and I were both really, really high on Dame coming out. We both had him at RB3 in our rookie rankings behind Brees and Ken Walker. So I can definitely buy the talent. I thought Singletary would mix in more as like a pass blocker, but if they're truly going to play Pierce all 3 downs, he's obviously, at RB 24 and ADP on Underdog all summer. He's been a really good value. Dobbins is obviously tricky for everybody, but Did you guys know, like, he's only played 3 games with 60% or more of the snaps?
Yeah.
3 times in his entire career.
But
It's
you could
like,
say with a new coaching staff, maybe that changes. So there is that sort of hypothetical upside. You mentioned you and Brett being so high on Dameon Pierce. I was a big Dameon Pierce guy last year when I put out, my big article. I was saying he is the number 1 must draft player you can't leave your draft without. He was going round 12, and then he rose all the way up to like round 6.
Yeah.
Just because like the training camp buzz was so insane, which brings us back to the last running back Ciely mentioned, which is James Cook. Like, he's getting the exact same buzz, but there's just not this corresponding ADP jump, which has me excited. It's like, oh, he's running wide receiver routes, which is what he did in college. He's getting deep targets, which is so rare for a running back. He's their every down back. Like, I did not see that from his profile coming out, like the size concerns. He did get round 2 capital. I just didn't see that happening. But like, there was, with all the Josh Allen concerns, he's a vulture, all that. We did see Devin Singletary at the tail end of 2 years ago, with the postseason included. He was averaging over 21 fantasy points per game. He was an uber bell cow. So I do find myself liking James Cook and the upside there.
The one that to jump in here that I think compares a little bit to Dameon Pierce this year would be Rashad White. A crappy potential crappy offense.
Keep that one under wraps, but yeah.
And the thing is like we see the preseason and they're all trying to figure out who's next up behind Rashad White. It's almost like, who cares? Because do we expect it to be a bottom 10, probably even bottom 5 offense? Just if everything goes haywire, the offensive line has question marks, but as seen with Dameon Pierce, I mean, you can be in a crap situation and still produce top 10. It's rare. I actually did a study. You guys remember the late, great Mac Tagliere was the one that he put out an article a bunch of years ago pointing out like how rare it is for a running back to finish top 10 on a bottom 10 offense. And I just pulled the last 5 years, just say, like, let's go back and double check if this is still true. And it was the last 5 years, there's been 10 running backs, an average of 2 per year on a bottom 10 offense that have finished as RB1s. And it's even worse when you drop down to a bottom 5 offense. But Rashad White, we're not even like where he's going. He's still like down in the bottom 20s for like somebody that, okay, if it goes wrong, a terrible offense, he's RB 17. Like, it's still a value for somebody that's going to be touching the ball almost every down. Well, on the field for almost every down, not touching the ball. That would be insane.
I think there's an important exemption there. Christian McCaffrey strikes me as a major outlier. And that's that if you're heavily involved in the passing game, offensive line concerns don't matter. Game script does not matter, because then you're used as an extension of the running game. Targets in PPR leagues, this, Jake, worth 2.5 times as much as carries. And so that's your path to overcoming all that. And that's what we keep hearing with Rashad White is he's an incredible receiver. That's probably his trump card. And so to me, I think he's maybe the most mispriced running back in all the drafts right now.
Yeah. Rashad is looking really good. And especially, obviously, since we've seen all these free agent backs, who scares you? Really, like, who's left that scares you here? I don't even know if they're really process-wise. I don't even know if there was a back that even scared us. But just looking back at the last, since 2000, Rashad White, one of 16 backs to catch 50 balls as a rookie, as a rookie running back. So, like you said, Scott, he might only score 6, maybe 7 touchdowns on the ground, but if he's walking into 80, 90 targets, he's a very good value. I did want to talk about that pocket, and I guess we kind of covered it, like the 6, 7, 8, 9 pocket. Jake, you're in on Rashad White. I'm in Rashad White. Scott's gigantically in on Rashad White. Are there any other guys in that pocket, any players that you've moved up based on preseason, based on just like, going through your projections process? Is there any guys, any running backs from, let's say, that you previously had in like rounds 9 or 10 that you've bumped up, or conversely, any guys that you've bumped down?
So I have two. One has stayed higher than this rounds have been, and the other has bumped up a little bit. And that was coming from somebody that was already bumping the second one up, but I'll save him for a second. The first one is Antonio Gibson. I don't understand what happened here. Like, I don't know if, look, and I'm not saying Antonio Gibson is going to be a top 20 running back, but it felt like the past 2 years, the entire industry was like, it's Antonio Gibson season. He's going to be unleashed. He's going to be unlocked in the passing game. He's going to be, and all this kind of great stuff. And then we get the arrival of one of the greatest offensive minds in all of football, and Antonio Gibson continue to look great, and all of a sudden people are just like, nah, whatever. Antonio Gibson, RB
Did you just
32.
call Eric Bieniemy one of the greatest offensive minds in football?
Yes.
Oh, that's a spicy take, Jake.
You don't believe it?
I mean,
You
I
think
think
he's
Matt Nagy was like clearly an incompetent head coach and play caller, and Andy Reid seems to think this guy's better than Eric Bieniemy. So I don't know.
These coaching
It's
It's
tree
hard
moves,
to
man,
not
it's
look
50-50.
really good with Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. Is my
That's
concern.
fair. So here's what I'll say. Like, okay, maybe we'll say, can I say top 5, top 10? Offensive coordinators only. And I like here's why. And we'll sidebar on this real quick, because of how he adapted the offense to what was going wrong with the wide receivers and changed it. Like, we saw the offense was broken after the departure of Tyreek Hill, and they kept trying to run the Tyreek Hill offense briefly. And then with the Juju Smith-Schuster, they pulled everything in. They started doing the let's get people open quicker. And once you adapted that offense, we saw Patrick. Everybody, you guys remember the conversation. Everybody's like, man, I took Patrick Mahomes as the first quarterback. What's wrong with Patrick Mahomes? He's broken. He's not the best quarterback anymore. And then he fixed it. So again,
I mean,
maybe
did
that
he
was
fix it, or did
again.
Andy Reid
So
fix it?
I said
Okay.
maybe it's
Yeah.
Mahomes. Okay, like I'll take that as part of it. So I'm not calling him the best. But anyway, point being, like, we've been wanting more of Antonio Gibson, and I'm not taking anything away from Brian Robinson. I think Brian Robinson is a great talent as well, especially somebody who said that himself. I was not 100% even coming off the gunshot wound for a couple weeks. Like, I still felt it while I was running. But even if it's a 1-2 punch, we've done the 1-2 punch with other backfields where Antonio Gibson's the pass catcher and he's in the RB 30s. So I've been higher on Antonio Gibson this entire time. I feel like he should be higher in general. But the other was, I'm not a Ken Walker guy. I think Ken Walker, where he excels, should show up on the field. He's one of the most inefficient short yardage guys, but that's where he should be good. Like, his breakaway plays are still great. That's not going to go away from his game, but he should be better in the short yards than he is. And they draft Charbonnet, who I think is a great pass catcher, somebody who also can run some tough short yards that people kind of overlook because of his pass catching ability. And now Ken Walker's been banged up. Charbonnet's already back on the field. Charbonnet's making plays week in and week out. And how many times have we seen Pete Carroll in the preseason see a new running back flash a couple times, and then we're screwed because it's a 50-50 split or whatever. So it's not so much that I think Charbonnet is overtaking Ken Walker or he's going to make Ken Walker irrelevant. But Ken Walker is RB teens and Charbonnet all the way down almost at the 40th running back and like the 90 to 100 range. Like, the gap should just be vastly smaller, in my opinion, for those two.
To me, these are best ball guys and not
Yeah.
redraft. I just question the upside. I think Washington is a 1-2-3 punch. You called it a 1-2 punch, a 1-2-3 punch on a bad team without a quarterback. I don't know. I'm a Chris Rodriguez guy, so maybe I'm overstating his impact, but it really seemed like Bieniemy in particular has a year one role in mind for him. And then Charbonnet, I think there's an injury to Ken Walker. I think he's a league winner, but otherwise I see them cannibalizing production too much for you to ever really feel comfortable starting them. Graham, you're the running back guru. What did you see from Charbonnet on tape? Because I to be honest, wasn't a huge fan. I like Kendre Miller a little bit more.
Yeah, Charbonnet strikes me as a guy who can do everything pretty well, but nothing extremely well. Like, he's obviously a physical runner. We saw that in the preseason. But there's just things that Ken Walker does on the field that Charbonnet can't do. And I definitely grant you that this will probably be some sort of gross committee. And like Ken Walker, the Seahawks only ran 8 plays inside of the 10-yard line and called it, 8 runs on those plays. Like, the opportunity for touchdowns just was not there relative to how good the offense was. So I think, there's going to be some natural, just more touchdown chances for these guys. But yeah, it definitely could be a split. I just think Charbonnet is like a solid player, whereas Ken Walker, like, if we're shooting for upside, like, Walker's got that home run ability. And Jake, I've been saying this, like, there's these like new breed of running backs. They're kind of like the true 3 outcome running backs, I've been calling them. They either strike out, they walk, or they hit home runs. And Ken he's the true 3 outcome runner. Like, he's either going to strike out.
I agree.
Yeah, he's going to strike out and hit his offensive lineman and go backwards. He's gonna walk. He'll have like a 3-yard run, or he's going to hit a home run, and he's going to turn in a play that should have only gained 3 yards into 15. And like, I think that's the difference between he and Charbonnet. Is like, Charbonnet is always going to get what's blocked. They have like a nice kind of consistent guy with that. And then you compare it to Walker, who's actually kind of more the lightning compared to Charbonnet's Thunder. But yeah, for fantasy, at the end of the day, we got to project opportunity, we got to project touches, we got to project red zone touches, and this should be a committee.
Yeah, and
Jake,
I'm not saying it's Charbonnet in the 5th. I mean, he's going.
Yeah.
You said this the 9th round. I'm going to take a
Yeah.
flyer on that. I think he's Cole Beasley of running backs. Like he's just going to chip in and produce every single week, and at the end of the year, he's going to finish like RB 36.
Oh my God, he needs to grow the hair out and everything. Oh my goodness, the Cole Beasley running backs. Yeah, Jake, that's like, I think this is kind of just like a more broader point about this year. And this is, we've been talking 25 minutes basically all about running backs. This year is just wide open at running back. It just feels like after round 4, like after, that pocket of like Ramondre and Brees and Najee go, it's just like wide open. And I guess structurally speaking, like, what do you have any advice for listeners? Like, this is kind of a different year. Like, what are you doing in your drafts? And are you allowing this kind of like different RB market to change how you draft?
Yeah, I think that this is what we talk about in fantasy all too often. It's cliche, but zig when everybody else is zagging. The wide receivers have become almost overinflated at this point, like because it's like, oh, they're more predictable, they're less likely to get hurt, and we've seen the injury reports from like doctors, even on all these sites, but there's a 0.8 difference in the injury rate of top 12 running backs versus top wide receivers. And Scott's smiling because he knows the one that I referenced, and I saw that, and that's why I'm talking about it. And but all down the list it's not even as far as you're going, which I'm going to answer your question. But when we see the RB12, who is still an RB1, sitting there in almost round 4, we've gone too far, people. Like we've taken the wide receiver predictability. It's not, I'm not saying it's not there, and the reliability, it is there, but we've gone too far with it. Now we need to start zigging and getting back to running backs. I'm not saying you have to go running back to start the first 2 rounds. I would never do that if possible, but it has happened. But you're talking about, like you said, 4th, 5th, 6th round. We're still talking about Miles Sanders, whether or not you're a fan of him, the work is going to be there. Cam Akers, whether or not you're a fan of him, the work is going to be there. Granted, injuries, passing games, but like you can look at all the other names in this list. We brought up Dameon Pierce, who's in the 4th round. You're talking about Rashad White, who we already brought up. Isaiah Pacheco's back at practice if he's going to be healthy, the lead option of the Chiefs, even if he's not involved in the passing game. Isaiah Pacheco's down in the 7th round almost. So it's not so much the fact of like, hey, you need to zig and start taking these running backs earlier. It's just now the opening is there. If you want to still go alpha, whatever you want to call it, wide receiver, I think it's even more available for that roster construction because you could hit wide receiver first 2 rounds. And if you really don't want, what have you got? This is the term. It's the RB dead zone, which is honestly, it's a moving target. Like RB dead zone means nothing. It's going to be different in every single draft.
Yep.
But it's generally been those outside the top 20 running backs kind of in that range. But the RB dead zone that we've created as an industry because of that now includes guys with full-time roles. So you can actually dip in and get a solid RB1 and 2 if you still want to go wide receivers in the first 2 and 3 rounds. So I like that what it's opened up for us as smart drafters. As Scott said at the very beginning of the show, you echoed it too, is like, you've got to be able to adapt to your drafts. Well, the drafts nowadays in 2023 means adapting and finding a rock solid RB2 where you used to have to be drafting them in the 3rd or 4th round.
I think something unique about this season is like the most important position in fantasy is like also one of the most difficult. It's like, do you spend an early round pick on Daniel Carlson or Justin Tucker, or do you grab the value in Graham Gano? Jake, what are your thoughts?
Oh God, I hate that question. This is
Band
kicker shirt, but the president kickers. I have T-shirts. If you're going to go to RotoWear has co-sponsored this and has them, so I didn't have to have the supply behind me. But yes, the band kickers for life. Just add another flex, please do so. And also, so your waiver wire isn't flush with options to step right in. But good God, don't ever ask me a question like that, man.
Hey, I'm just saying, Brandon McManus is looking good, man. You got to bump him out your projections. You got to bump.
I love when people jump into my columns like rankings and projections, like, you really won't rank kickers? I'm like, no, this isn't a joke. It's not like I'm sitting here being like, no, I'm not going to waste my good time on meaningless junk. Sorry. I know there's people who do it.
Plea to like commissioners who are listening to urge them to abandon the kicker position, most volatile, least predictive position, right?
So there's the first and foremost thing that I'll say, and if there's a real life kicker out there listening there, but I'm sorry, but their job is dependent on the offense failing. That's first and foremost. If your job is dependent on the offense not doing their job, your job sucks. I'm sorry. But the second part about it is I've actually done an article on The Athletic why kickers suck. Everybody's like, oh, they're predictable. At DFS, when it was around, I did it on FanDuel. I took advantage when it was back on FanDuel. I took advantage of all the people spending up for the top price kicker. And I took my savings because it is somewhat predictable from that standpoint if you're going to do the DFS route. But from a real life standpoint is the best offenses often don't even produce the best kickers because they're scoring touchdowns instead of setting up field goals. So the variance, I'd rather just add another flex spot. And it all started, if everybody wants to know, it started the week that Rob Baronis kicked 18 billion field goals. And I lost the matchup watching him score more than every quarterback in existence that week.
There's your origin story, your Jake Ciely band kicker's origin story. He's still so tilted from those days.
Want to know how I got these scars? Yeah, so I'm with you. I'm with you, man. I think we like experts like us have a massive edge in fantasy. Anyone who reads our stuff does as well. And I like PPR because it makes it more predictable, thus furthering my edge. And so getting rid of kickers would help that. I knew you would like that question. That was one of the questions I added. I was scrolling through your Twitter, trying to come up with some more questions. I saw some Justin Ross love, I love me some of that. And then I saw a graphic based on one of your most recent articles, bold predictions. And like, those are tough articles because you really need, like, that's the thesis. Like these are bold. That's probably not going to happen, but I could see it happening. Right. And I kind of agree with every single, and these all seem fairly realistic to me. I'm going to read them down one by one. And again, I pretty much agree with every single one of these. Anthony Richardson sets the rookie QB rushing record. Easy. I think he does it. Nick Chubb scores 20 touchdowns. I could really see that. Darren Waller dethrones Travis Kelce as the top tight end. I thought I was highest on Darren Waller in the industry, but that is a spicy take. I don't know. I can be that bold. Jahan Dotson is a top 10 wide receiver. I could see him being the real wide receiver one in this offense. And then Cooper Kupp sets the all-time single season reception and receiving yards marks. Love that, Jake. Full agreement.
Yeah. The Jahan Dotson one, for everybody that wants to fall out of their chair when they go to that article, is the comp that, like, there was the Tyler Lockett comp coming out of college, Terry McLaurin, all down the list of Sean Jackson. And I said, well, let's take it one step further. Let's get nuts. Let's get crazy. Like, oh boy. Antonio Brown. And look, no, he is not. Like, everybody just, like, forget this podcast. Screw you guys. I don't know why you had this idiot on your show, but I am not calling him Antonio Brown. Where I went deeper, as you saw in the article about the Antonio Brown part, is that I compared Sam Howell to Ben Roethlisberger coming out of college. Actually, when they were doing the draft that year, I made a joke. I said, just draft the same guy you just had and get Sam Howell, who is like Ben Roethlisberger stylistically. Does he ever throw 4,500 yards, 35 touchdowns? Like, probably not. Like, that's a high expectation for any quarterback. But the style comparison is why I said, if you look at Jahan Dotson and his style and what he brings and being able to separate, but also bring the big plays while being able to separate, and what a quarterback like Roethlisberger and who is Sam Howell can turn to as his number one, Terry McLaurin is still going to be good, but Terry McLaurin is going to turn into the Juju Smith-Schuster or the other options outside of Antonio Brown those years. Antonio Brown's role is Jahan Dotson's role. And if you look at last year, as the third option to start the season with junk at quarterback, he was number one in end zone targets and end zone receptions returned into touchdowns, vastly kicking to the curb Terry McLaurin with 8 and 6. Terry McLaurin had 7 and 2. So I say that even with that mess last year, the number one option, top 10 potential, that if you ask me out of my 6, which I'd put my money on if I had to bet one, it would be the Dotson pick.
Yeah. Wow. That was probably my least favorite, but I can make a compelling case as well. Poor quarterback play last year. He dealt with a lingering hamstring injury. Hamstring injuries tend to linger. That happen weeks 4 through 12. But when he was healthy enough to play on just 66% of the team snaps, he averaged 14 fantasy points per game. That was ahead of Michael Pittman, ahead of DK Metcalf, Mike Williams, Terry McLaurin, Chris Olave, Deebo Samuel, guys going really early. From week 13 on, he ranked 10th in yards per route run, ahead of Terry McLaurin. It wouldn't shock me if Dotson was the leading receiver for the team this year.
My first take of the offseason is I'm going to have 100% Jahan Dotson in best ball, and didn't get there. Unfortunately, everybody else is kind of feeling the same way you are, Jake. It's like, Terry McLaurin's awesome. We finally got him a decent quarterback, but so is Jahan Dotson. And like, we've been high on Dotson's talent since he came out of college. And I think there's a real chance this is like a 1A, 1B type of situation. Yeah. Real quick, got to tell you guys about our friend Edwin Porras's new injury-prone draft guide and playbook. It has 40-plus player profiles with injury histories, injury concerns. Edwin he's dug into 10-plus years of NFL data, and he has cut through all of the noise and everything you need to know for your injury decisions this season. I edited Edwin's book. Personally, he spent a ton of time. There's a ton of excellent research nuggets, not just like at a player level, but just like article, like worthy anecdotes within the guide. Edwin is selling his book on Shopify. You can go to Edwin's Twitter account. You can find a link at FBRE Injury Doc. And for listening to this pod, you can get a 25% off code, Injury Prone 25, to take 25% off our friend Edwin Porras's Injury Prone Draft Guide. Guys, seriously, you will probably be buying this every single year. It's the nuts. Jake, before we get you out of here, I want to talk about two extremely tricky backfields that Scott and I have been struggling to project all offseason. We've been going back and forth on Miami, and we've been going back and forth on Chicago. Now, we did get a little bit of news. Devon Achane hurt his shoulder in the game over this past weekend. He's week to week. He might be ready for week 1, but at the very least, more missed practice time for him is no good. So with all that being said, where's your vibe on Miami and Chicago?
So Miami, you guys are gonna make me sing on your show. I did this on my podcast last year, and it continues into this season. It's don't go chasing Dolphins running backs. I'm not doing it. I'm not playing this game with the Dolphins running backs because even if you get it right, you still might not get it right. And that being said, is like if it is Achane, which we hope for projectability and his ability in the passing game and things like that, you still might not get the game right. He still might not be the leading scorer that week. And then we are going to play this chasing your tail game of like, oh, Mostert's the lead. Mostert's been the lead a couple weeks in a row. We did this last year. And then we come out the very next game. Oh, it's not Mostert anymore. Now it's Jeff Wilson or it's somebody else or it's Savon Ahmed because that's what they felt like this week. Oh, why? Oh, what tree did Mike McDaniel come from? Like we're really surprised by this. So I'm not doing the Dolphins, but if I will, I'll just take the cheapest one. I'll take the flyer on the cheapest one because if I'm wrong, no, okay. The Chicago backfield. This is what I hinted towards earlier in the show. This one I do have a strong stance on, and I will argue this one, and maybe I'm going down the Cam Akers road from last year, and this is the new one, but I don't get the hate of wanting Khalil Herbert. Look, even if he's not involved in the passing game that much, okay, fine, let's only talk about the games where he ran the ball 10-plus times. 50-plus yards in every single one of those. 5.1 yards per carry. We've seen Khalil Herbert with the first team. We've seen them trying to get him some passing options in the preseason. Again, maybe that doesn't even carry over. And Rashad Johnson, sure, better pass blocker, better pass catcher, whatever it want to be. But if you want to talk about pass blocking grades, Khalil Herbert better last year than Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Dalvin Cook. Oh, a bunch of dudes where it doesn't matter that they were middle-of-the-road pass blocking. And I'm not saying Khalil Herbert's a top 10 running back. I'm just saying the hate for him being basically a dead zone beyond. He's round 8 still? Round 7 starting to creep up now that people are coming around on him. I do have a strong opinion that it is Khalil Herbert with Rashad Johnson. Granted, he's been 4th so far through the preseason. We know that's not true. But I think he's going to be a sprinkle and not a significant threat to Khalil Herbert. I think Khalil Herbert would have to play poorly a couple weeks in a row before Johnson takes over. I think this is Khalil Herbert's backfield, 100%.
That's the way I've been inching towards too. I had it projected as like Herbert is the clear 1A all off season. Like if there's a guy in this backfield that they're going to give the keys to and just like be the 1A week 1, it'll be him. And then as we've gone through this process and we've gone through the preseason, it's like yesterday, Deontay Foreman or Saturday, Deontay Foreman was, playing with the second team offense. Roshan Johnson, rookies have to earn it, yada, yada, yada. Coaches love to do that, but Roshan's out there too. And they were resting Khalil Herbert. And then when they did play Justin Fields, he was on the field for all of the snaps. And I get it. It was 2 drives. They were both, extremely weird. They both had, Moore had the long touchdown than Herbert did too. But then, it's not just a small sample of usage in preseason. It was last year's data. I mean, no running back was better after contact than Khalil Herbert. No running back was better on zone runs than Khalil Herbert. And that's all the Bears run. So I think everything is kind of set up right now for Herbert to get out of the gates really quick. And I guess that would be my one concern. And I have more in an article coming out this week about this backfield, why I'm targeting Khalil Herbert for all the same reasons you are. But my one concern is Roshan Johnson. Like, there's one guy in this backfield that can play on passing downs and kind of give the Bears that versatility of like, hey, we don't know if it's run or pass. It's him. I don't know if the Chicago Bears care about that this year. Like, they're going to be passing, they're going to be running so much. I don't think they care too much about that and care too much about their tells or anything. That would be my one concern. But Khalil is definitely somebody who should be coming up in your rankings.
Don't disagree at all, but I mean, you miss on an 8th round running back, like we do that every
who cares?
year, so.
You're gonna do that every year. And those 8th round receivers, man, right now it's like Cortland Sutton and Elijah. Like, I love Elijah Moore, but like there's definitely downside with Elijah Moore. Like he had last year happened, Oh gosh, yeah.
He's Jerry
I
Rice.
love Elijah Moore. My downside is like, is he only going to be out there for 3 wide? It's just a snap problem.
That is, that's a real concern. Yeah, that's my only concern is if it's DPJ and Cooper, then that's probably not great. But regardless, I like Elijah Moore. But that's the thing is like, and I have an article, like I said, coming out later this week talking about just this, and it's those running backs in that 8th to 9th round pocket. And Khalil Herbert is so
even pulling another one to Scott's argument earlier in the show, which was echoing what my point was about drafting for upside. The upside of Juju Smith-Schuster at the same spot, or Khalil Herbert potentially as the lead option in this backfield. Why would you take Juju Smith-Schuster here? Just take Khalil Herbert.
Right.
Yeah, this isn't best ball. It's a season-long league. Like, Juju's upside is like, okay, he finishes as wide receiver 30. Herbert's upside is he's a top 15 running back. Like, that is absolutely in his range. Jake, this was awesome. You're awesome like always. We appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you spelling some wisdom and really kind of just breaking down really the whole 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th years of running backs with Scott and I today. Anything you want to plug? Anything you got coming up? Anything you're excited about? I know you want to talk about your Mets, so we can do that if you want.
Thank you so much for that. I was thrilled what they did at the deadline. The most expensive prospect purchasing in the history of baseball. Like,
True.
I'm excited for
back though.
Yeah, I'm excited for next year and beyond. It's been miserable, but at least I can completely tune out baseball for the past month and get straight into football. That was nice. But
that's what it is being a Met fan. Oh, perpetually excited for next season.
Yeah, 100%. And then by the All-Star break, you're like, well, it's football time, as it always should be. But Scott actually teed up the question before, which led into I'm going to do my biggest ADP versus projections differences, but versus projections to kind of go into what we were talking about today. Like, it's not why are the projections so different than the ADP? There's more context to it behind there. But also, if people haven't been listening, now new Sirius XM show 9 to 11 a.m. on Saturdays. So start off your weekend, as Nando would say, start off your weekend wakey with eggs and jakey, as Nando would say. I hate Nando Defino for that one.
Very nice.
That's great.
That's very nice. Well, wake up with Jake on Saturdays on Sirius XM. Jake, you were fantastic. Make sure you follow Jake on Twitter at AllInKid. For Scott, I'm Graham. Thanks for listening, guys.